In the midst of all this ferment, I was growing as a musician, and that seemed to give me the energy to continue traveling around the country, which I loved doing. It was a very exciting time for me. I wasn't getting a whole lot of feedback about my own music, but nonetheless, I started to feel comfortable about bringing in new material. I had a girlfriend named Bobby at the time, whom I had met in Scottsdale while performing at the lumber mill. For Bobby, for Baby, was an early attempt to order my romantic thoughts. Still, For Bobby became one of the songs we did, and we included it on the trio's next to last album. That small achievement gave me the confidence to bring the trio in closer contact with the audience. By the time we came back to the Cellar Door for our second engagement in 1966, a year after we started out there were lines around the block. David Steinberg, the comedian, was our opening act. Everybody was coming to see us. I was still a shy, introverted fellow, living a financially spare kind of existence, but on stage, I really opened up. We had a couple of weeks to kill after that second engagement at the Cellar Door, and having no place in particular to go, I stayed around Washington. I had a lot of friends in the area, and one of them, Jim Cunningham, invited me to stay with him and his roommate at their place in Virginia. I kept busy those 2 weeks, doing things with friends, letting certain feelings work their way to the surface. One night when Jim and his roommate went to a party, I decided to stay put, and started out the evening working on an oil painting. I'd gotten interested in painting while studying architecture in college. I was playing around with an idea. I had a 6-pack of beer and a couple of sandwiches, and then I picked up my guitar and wrote a song with my soul wide open and my mind picturing the scene as if it stood before me, real enough to touch. I called it, "Oh Babe, I Hate to Go." I wrote the song not so much out of the experience of feeling that way for someone, as out of the longing to have someone to love. When I got through, I knew I'd written my best song yet. It was so exciting that, late as it was, I called Andy Poole, a friend who lived in the district, roused her from her sleep, and rode the Triumph over to her place to sing it for her. She was really knocked out by it, as were a few other people I sang it for. A few days later, I rode up the turnpike to the Philadelphia Folk Festival and sang the song for Milt, who had come down to hear the trio perform. And he was blown away. That fall, when we were in L.A., I went back to Gold Star Studios with Paul Prestopino and Bob Heffron accompanying me on guitars, and cut this little album of about 13 songs. I never gave it a name, but I made 250 copies, which cost me all the money I had in the bank, and sent them out as Christmas presents to people I had met around the country. One of them went to Peter, Paul, and Mary, and they so loved the song "Oh Babe, I Hate to Go" that they featured it on their new album. Milt had the name changed to "Leaving on a Jet Plane" when he published it. They were at the top of their game, and "Leaving on a Jet Plane" was going to become their first and only #1 hit record, so my sales started to fill. We did a third album, Mitchell Trio Alive, which included our version of "Leaving on a Jet Plane," as well as another song I'd written, "I Like to Deal with the Ladies." As a viable commercial entity, though, we kept losing altitude. When Warner Brothers Reprise, the label we were on, held its sales meeting that fall, we were not included. The days of the Mitchell Trio dwindled to a precious few. That spring, I hooked up with a concert bureau that booked coffeehouse acts into colleges. As the writer of "Leaving on a Jet Plane," formerly of the Mitchell Trio, I could earn about $500 a week, which was top dollar on their circuit. The circumstances were humble. You slept and ate in the dorm of the school where you were playing, and you carried your own setup from place to place. But the interest was there. I could see that what I was doing was working. I got only 4 gigs that spring, but in each place there'd be 15 or 20 people on the first night. On the second night, those people would come back with their friends. On the third night, it would be packed, and then it would stay packed for the rest of the week. And then that summer, 1969, the summer of Woodstock, a minor miracle occurred. Milt Oken landed me a recording contract. I think he'd already been turned down by 16 record companies. RCA liked my tapes, and when I came in and auditioned for them, they liked me. They, being a courtly gentleman named Harry Jenkins, who was the man responsible for Elvis Presley going to RCA. It was the standard record deal, 2 albums a year for 2 years. I was elated. My first album, Rhymes and Reasons, came out that fall about the time Crosby, Stills and Nash had their first big hit, Marrakesh Express, and 2 more divergent paths by folk singers couldn't have been clearer. There, on one hand, were the representatives of the flower power generation, and here was I, still a Midwesterner singing folk songs. Instead of regretting the divergence, I went with it. On my first promotional tour, I sang Follow Me, which is still one of my big songs. It's by far the hardest thing I've ever done, to be so in love with you and so alone. Follow me where I go, what I do and who I know. Make it part of you to be a part of me. At press receptions, I'd also do Leaving on a Jet Plane and the Ballad of Spiro Agnew, which made everyone laugh and take notes. It didn't always get played on the radio, but I was making advances. People were getting to know John Denver. My price for performing went up, and I started to make a little money. I put a small band behind me, just 2 instruments that kind of melded together. After my 3rd album, the Cellar Door booked me as a headliner for the first time. The Mitchell Trio was fast becoming history for me, but the basic lessons I'd learned while working with them hadn't been lost. I'd learned that powerful songs are powerful not because they're pretty or bouncy or funny, but because they're about the human condition and what we all aspire to. I'd learned those were the songs I loved. I'd learned also that one of the things that moves people is someone saying musically or otherwise what they don't know how to say, or are afraid to say, or don't expect to hear said, and certainly not from someone on the stage. I'd learned that I loved to be the bearer of that gift. And I'd learned to recognize songs that allowed me to sing with my whole self, songs that started quietly and then built up until I was singing from my toes, reaching for that high note to put my feelings into. These were songs that had been all around us, but experience had made the stories they told seem more acute. It surprised people when I'd sing, I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free, this young white kid with the granny glasses who didn't seem like anyone who would worry about that. I had started learning how to find those songs in myself. Annie's song. You fill up my senses like a night in a forest, like the mountains in springtime, like a walk in the rain, like a storm in the desert, like a sleepy blue ocean. You fill up my senses. Come fill me again. We met in the spring of 1966. The Mitchell Trio had performed a concert at Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, Minnesota, and afterward we were invited over to the Student Union where there was a charity drive going on. All the fraternities and sororities were doing things to raise money, and I got drawn over to a group of students in one of the lounges who were doing a show. I couldn't figure out what the show was about, but this one gal in jeans and a flannel shirt with the tails hanging out filled me with wonder. She'd come out on stage every so often carrying the signboards announcing the passing scenes. The show ended, and someone who'd been to our concert came over with a guitar and asked if I'd sing some songs. I agreed, and Annie sat right down in front. Her friends told me later it was the first time that they had seen her quiet for that long. And of course I sang every song just for her. I wanted her to know how I felt, even if I didn't know how to say it. The attentiveness of my audience ended up giving me courage, though, and as we were leaving, I boldly asked this girl her name and where she was from, hoping it might be some place where we'd be performing. I knew we weren't planning to be back in Adolphus for a while. This is where I'm from, she said. I'm a hometown girl. And lightheartedly I parried something like, oh, that's too bad, which she misconstrued. She thought I was being a jerk, and that was the end of the conversation. But in the fall, the trio came back to Minnesota to do a show in Mankato, and while we were driving through St. Peter, my thoughts flashed on this girl, Annie something. What mystery made me want to call her? In Mankato, during the sound check, some people from Annie's college happened by, and one of them knew Annie Martell and told me how to get in touch with her. No, she hadn't forgotten me. Yes, she'd like to come to our concert. Yes, I'd pick her up even though I didn't have much time before the show. The girl who her friends said you couldn't keep still had been to Europe since I last saw her. Florence was the most beautiful city in the world, she said. Her hair was cut short. It had been long when I first met her. She'd filled in. She looked great. She came to the concert, and then a couple of nights later she came to another one nearby. Our courtship began to flourish. That second concert fell on a Saturday night. Annie came to it with her father's front-wheel drive Oldsmobile Toronado. Her folks were up in Minneapolis for the big football weekend, the Gophers of the University of Minnesota that Saturday, and the Vikings of the NFL on Sunday. Her dad was a serious football fan. I was staying in Minneapolis, so we decided to drive up together. I had Sunday off, and Annie wanted me to meet her parents, whom I liked immediately. By the time we got there, Jim and Norma Martell had been to the University of Minnesota game and out to dinner, and they were really loose and very funny. Annie's dad owned a restaurant in St. Peter. The next afternoon, while Annie's folks were at the NFL game, we spent a chaste middle American afternoon in their hotel room, but it worked its magic. By the time we kissed goodbye and I saw Annie off to school, I was smitten. Smitten at 23. I was ready to die for love. I was still very much the vagabond king, living out of suitcases with no place to call home. I visited my folks only rarely, so I started to hang out with Annie as much as I could and began to think of Minneapolis as home base. At one point, Annie said to her mother, "What am I going to do with him?" And her mother replied, "Don't worry, you'll think of something." That Christmas, I inveigled an invitation from Annie to spend part of the holidays with her and her family. I had such a nice time getting to know her parents, her sisters, and her brother. I brought along a model of the Apollo spacecraft and spent most of the time working on it with Annie's brother Ben. Later that winter, Annie's school ski club went to Aspen, and I showed up there and surprised her. We slept together one night, after we both had had too much to drink, but it was all very innocent. In the morning I went out to the drugstore to buy Annie a toothbrush, and when I came back she was gone. She didn't want her friends to know how close we had grown. Annie, I might add here, was a person who never needed approval. She was raised in one place. She went to grade school, junior high school, and high school all in the same town. Her father was a successful businessman, and she was always really popular, the most popular girl around. On top of everything, she was really pretty. Winning approval was never something she had to contend with. In that sense, we were opposites. Her involvement with me created a bit of a quandary. Out on the road again, I found myself desperately missing her and decided I wanted to marry her. I didn't know how to take care of myself, much less another person, but I heard the ancestral voices. "You're 23 years old. It's time you were settling down with a good woman. It's time to be thinking of having a family. Time to be putting down the foundation of your house." When I popped the question on the phone, Annie turned me down flat. I didn't know what to do next, and the relationship might have died right there. But in those days, matters of the heart were all-or-nothing propositions. I'd give all or nothing. But before things got really bad between us, Annie's best friend, Ann Sullivan, called and played matchmaker. "You ought to call her," she told me. "She really misses you." I swallowed my pride and proposed again. This time she said yes. Yes, yes, yes. In New York, I went to Tiffany's and bought an engagement ring, which I carried around until I got back to Minneapolis. Ring in pocket, I took Annie to dinner at her dad's restaurant. When she went off to powder her nose, I slipped the ring into her glass of Great Northern sparkling burgundy. When she discovered it, we had a big laugh. All the good things I had hoped for were happening. On June 9th, 1967, we had a big wedding in a modern and beautiful Lutheran church in St. Peter, with the Venerable Reverend Alstrom presiding. The ceremony and its trappings had a bit of the past and a bit of the present, which suited the way Annie and I saw ourselves. Mike Koblich came and sang. My family was there, including my grandmother and a couple of aunts from Tulsa. So were David Boyce, Paul Prestopino, and Bob Heffron, the guys I worked with, who were my closest friends. After the ceremony, Annie's folks hosted a reception at their restaurant. The toast was made to Henry Dutchendorf and his bride. It was a great party, and we hated to leave. Early the next morning, We flew to L.A. to pick up my Mustang, and then we drove to Arizona. Our honeymoon was spent in a trailer that Annie's grandparents kept in Tempe. It was the height of the summer, and the place was fairly uninhabited, but the senior citizens who were there all took us under their wings. We spent our time playing together. I introduced Annie to the desert and to old friends in Scottsdale. During the first couple of years of marriage, we tried living in the Midwest, first in Chicago and then in Minneapolis. In Chicago, Mike Koblich passed on an apartment he and his wife had occupied in the Marina City complex, 47 stories up. We were living there, in fact, when the Mitchell Trio disbanded, and for a while it was touch and go financially. Chicago just proved too expensive for Annie and me, and after a year we moved to Minneapolis, where we found a nicer place for less money. I remember being very strident in conversations with Annie's friends, who were still mostly students. At that time, I saw myself as a worldly figure, and I liked being thought of as one by my captive audience. I wanted things to change, and I wasn't afraid to speak out. I liked being listened to. I think my strident tone, along with some of my more fanciful formulations, drove Annie a bit crazy. Most of the time she thought I was indulging my ego, but I was really trying to reach the point where I could say those things musically. One day in the shower, I started to write the song Rhymes and Reasons. So you speak to me of sadness and the coming of the winter, fear that is within you now that seems to never end, and the dreams that have escaped you, and a hope that you've forgotten. You tell me that you need me now, and you want to be my friend. And you wonder where we're going, where's the rhyme, and where's the reason. I was trying to define my beliefs as a man, what I thought life was about and for. Where's the rhyme, and where's the reason? And it's you who cannot accept it is here we must begin, to seek the wisdom of the children and the graceful way of flowers in the wind. For the children and the flowers are my sisters and my brothers. Their laughter and their loveliness would clear a cloudy day. Like the music of the mountains and the colors of the rainbow, they're a promise of the future and a blessing for today. Where those particular lyrics came from, I don't know. I can only guess. The biblical resonances are hard to miss, and as much as I thought of myself as lacking in religious feelings by then, I can't think of a song that better defines me at that time, and maybe still. That summer I landed the contract with RCA. My job back at Ledbetter's in the early days had paid less than $7,000 a year, and now I was going to get $7,000 an album guaranteed. Even this modest advance looked good. In fact, it looked great. Suddenly a solution had arisen for our money problems. After that, things kind of built, for both Annie and me, really. With the release of my third album, Whose Garden Was This?, in October of 1970, the current seemed to surge dramatically. So many possibilities emerged that I could hardly think them through. For one thing, Hal Thaw thought I need a personal manager again, someone who would be able to look after my career on more of a regular basis than he or Milt. And so in 1970, Jerry Weintraub and his wife Jane Morgan came into our lives.